Bridges, with your host, Doni Miller, connecting our community with information about issues and opportunities.
Hey, good Sunday morning and welcome to Bridges. I'm so glad you're with us this morning. You know, one of the things that we really don't know how to do, nobody teaches us how to grieve. And we're talking about the myths around that emotion today. We're talking about the ways that you can better handle it. And we think that this is such an important conversation at this particular time in our society. We've had some amazing tragedies, and even locally, the level of violence brings us all back to this issue of how we handle the loss. We're talking today with two experts from Hospice of Northwest Ohio. We're talking to Shar Brock. Shar is the bereavement counselor at Hospice. Welcome, Shar. I'm very glad to have you with us. And Dawn DeFalco, who is the bereavement team leader at Hospice. Thank you so much for joining us, Dawn.
You're welcome. It's nice to be here.
I think one of the first things that I'd like to talk about is just the difference between grieving and mourning, to kind of give folks just a little bit of information to work with to start. There is a difference, and I didn't know that there was a difference. What's that difference?
Well, the terminology is confusing, I think, sometimes, but grief is the feeling that we have when we have a loss. It can be a loss for anything. It doesn't necessarily come from a death. It can be the loss of a job, loss of security, in some of the current situations, loss of safety, like we're seeing across our world when crises happen and we don't know what's going on. So it's that experience of feeling that loss, and it can be very varied for everybody. Mourning, on the other hand, is what we do with that. How do we show our grief on the outside? So going to a funeral would be that, going to the cemetery, lighting a candle for someone, coming to a support group that Hospice does. Anything that we do that shows that we're actively grieving that loss.
Does it make a difference, though? Is the distinction just one of academics as opposed to necessity? Does it matter that we know the difference between grieving and mourning?
I think it's important to know that you have feelings to it and then you have an outward expression to it. Okay. And the grief is the feelings that are associated with it, and the mourning is more of the rituals. Shar gave some examples, but if you think about 9/11 and all the flags in the country went half-mast, that was an outward expression to the world that we were grieving as a nation. You see flowers and crosses at accident sites. That's that family or those individuals suffering that's saying, hey, we lost somebody, we're hurting. So it's letting everybody know that I'm hurting, and I think it's a reaction to try to get something back from people to get that support.
Yeah. You know, I think that we are just mystified by this whole process of grief. We are absolutely, it almost seems as though it swallows us up. Is that a very typical feeling?
I think it is. People are overwhelmed by it because I think you make a good point. We're not taught how to grieve. Yeah. And in our Western culture, we say, it's okay, but I'm going to only do it for a certain amount of time. And as a culture, when we can't take that pain away, we don't know how to continue to watch somebody go through that pain. So it's more about how can we reach out and support people in that pain so that they don't feel that they have to get over it.
You know, we're going to talk for a second about some things that are associated. I think that you guys call them the 5 tasks of mourning. We're going to talk about those things in just a second, but is there an amount of time that's appropriate to grieve?
I think that's one of the major myths that we have in our culture, is that there is a timetable, and there is no timetable. It's a lifetime journey. Some people call it a process, some call it a journey, and it never goes away. I think the intensity of the pain diminishes over time, but it's really a lifetime journey that goes on for years, decades. You never forget that loved one.
You know, the other reason that this conversation is so important is that for people who want to be supportive, who are not actually suffering the loss, but maybe suffering the loss through the pain of a friend, that way you'd never know quite what to say. I mean, how many times has somebody come to you and said, how are you doing? How do you think I'm doing? You know, I just lost, I just had this awful thing happen to me, but we don't know what to say. you know, if I can do something to help you, please let me know. Well, I'm probably not thinking about that right this minute. Right. So, you know, how are people best supportive in these situations?
Well, that's why we think there's power in the support group process, because people can come and talk about those things to other people that have experienced it. And that is one of the most common things I hear in my groups. Do you know what this person said to me? How insensitive could they have been?
Absolutely.
It was so stupid. What's wrong with people? You know, we hear those things all the time. And you're right, there are no adequate words.
No, there really are not.
Really, the best thing is to say I'm sorry and let it go, but of course as human beings we want to say more.
Is that really okay, just to say I'm sorry and let it go?
And be a presence. Just be present for somebody.
And what's that mean?
And that just means being present, not saying anything, not necessarily doing anything.
Being there.
Saying I'm here for you if you need me.
Listening to that person, listening to the nonverbals, listening to the verbals. I think it's okay to say, I'm so sorry for your loss and I have no idea what to say to you. That means more to the bereaved person than they're in a better place, or you'll get over this soon, or you'll move on.
You're in a better place when I just always just, you know, it's okay, but I want them here.
That's right.
And that's, I think, what people don't understand. Yeah. That happens a lot from a religious perspective. I've had people come from church and they say, well, they told us we should be glad. They're happy. They're in heaven now. Well, that's maybe true, but you're here without them.
That's right.
And so what they're doing is dishonoring your grief when they say something like that, really.
Totally without knowledge.
Without, not on purpose.
And wanting to have real compassion for that journey, it ends up being painful instead of helpful. Yeah. Let's take a look at some of the things that you guys are calling the 5 tasks of mourning. And I think there they are. Accept the reality of the situation.
And that sounds very simple, but it's not. Denial is we use denial a lot, and when something like that happens, it's perfectly okay to be in denial for a while. Even though you've gone through the funeral process and you've watched someone be buried, you can still go home and expect to see them because they've been in your life for a long time.
So that's what you mean by the denial.
So,
I'm sorry.
Right. It takes some period of time to have that be expected, because your normal experience is this person has been in your life for 40, 50 years. You're going to see them again the next day. So it takes time in our mind to accommodate that reality.
Sure. Some tips for accepting the reality?
Again, talking about it with somebody else, I think is...
What about moving the things away? I've always wondered about that. I have a friend who lost his wife. Actually, it's been several years ago now, and his house is still flooded with her chairs and her Afghans and her pictures. And is that okay?
Well, every situation is unique, and that's one of the problems with grief, is that nobody's going to do it the same.
But does that hold you in that denial?
Who knows? I mean, that person may need to hold on to those items for a period of time. I've had people that come to groups that they may, within the first 2 weeks, move everything out of the home, hide all the pictures, and I have other people that don't touch them for a year. For whatever reason, they need them, they feel that they need them, and so you try and help them work through that and process that. At some point, it could become problematic, I'm sure. But you have to allow them all to have their time. And again, that is the largest problem, is expecting that everybody should do everything the same way.
So there is no, it's not necessarily the best thing to just move people quickly through it. Like, let's clear this house out. Let's stop talking about it. Let's get you back out and get you dating, if that's what you want to do, if it's the loss of a significant other or a spouse. None of that is really scripted.
Exactly. And that's why a lot of families will have problems and a lot of people have disagreements, because they expect. Some people will say, don't do anything for a year, don't make any changes. Other people, they may go out and find a new relationship within 6 months, because that's a need that they have. And,
go ahead.
And we have to honor that and let them go at their own pace, but try and guide them. And again, talking about it with other people is going to be the most helpful.
Be really helpful. The second thing among those 5 tasks is work through the pain of the grief. This one I found particularly intriguing. It really sort of gives us permission to feel what we feel as long as we feel it, however we feel it. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And what term we also use with the bereaved is leaning into the pain.
Leaning into the pain.
So in other words, embrace the pain. And sometimes we get some rolled shoulders that are just like, oh, you got to be kidding me. How do I do that? This is so painful to begin with. But if you deny yourself that pain because of what you think others around you or your community around you have that expectation to do, that's when we start denying that pain.
You know, and I want to say too, Dawn, that it's important that people understand that this conversation is not just about the loss, the death of a person. It can be the loss of a person from the family because you're estranged, or someone's away from the home, wars, yeah, all those things.
I think that that's really important point, is to be able to define that grief is a reaction to any loss.
Absolutely.
And we automatically assume that in our culture, when we talk about loss, we think of the ultimate losses through death. But the loss is through divorce. Loss can be stock market crash and people's futures being lost from the finances.
Sure.
It can be loss of health. Suddenly I have this catastrophic illness. I've lost the ability to have a healthy life. Maybe it's loss of ability to make choices for your health care.
And you know what you've just done too is you've put some of the loss that people who are aging feel into some context that I think most of us are not really able to understand. You know, as we're starting to deal with elderly parents and they're starting to remember what it was like back in the good old days, or they couldn't, they're not able to get along. That in fact is a grieving process as well. Absolutely. Thank you for doing that. The other thing, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that one of the things that I found most interesting when I started doing a lot of reading on grief and the stages is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, that everybody's familiar with the stages.
Stages of death.
Her study, what she developed that from, she was a hospice physician, and those stages were from the patients in their grieving. And then when you look at all types of grieving, you see those stages in all grief. But this was originally brought to the forefront as a result of what she noticed with patients. So that goes into what you were saying, that, my gosh, you're talking about the patients and the elderly, and we forget sometimes the individuals that are sick, or that the individuals that are dying, they too are grieving their disease, they're grieving that they know that their life is coming to an end.
Absolutely.
And so it's more than just after the fact.
Right. You know what, this is going to be such a strange comment in this conversation, but I absolutely love being a woman, and I'll tell you why. One of the reasons that I'd love being a woman, Derek's looking at me like, oh my God, what's she going to say now? But one of the reasons I love it is that we have so many more permissions when it comes to the management of our emotions than men do. I would think that this journey would be particularly difficult for men because they are not comfortable. They haven't been given permission by this world we live in to lean into their emotions, to accept the pain that they're feeling in any real way. It's that you'll get through it, guy. That tough, the suck it up thing.
Which is exactly why we offer a Men in Grief group at hospice, because of that. Because we say that men grieve differently. I could just as easily say that women grieve differently.
I'm going to ask you though to hold that thought. We gotta go away. Don't you guys go anywhere. We've got lots more to talk about when we return, and we'll be right back.